Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to see if you listen to somebody in uniform. We'll see. I'm going to just invite you to stand for just 10 seconds, stretch, and then sit back down. All right? Here we go. Here we go. 9. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm fired up already this morning. I think we could move right on to the next session with panels. Thank you, Jerry and Rick, for just stirring our hearts, and we'll be speaking to some of those themes. By the way, I'm just honored and privileged and humbled to be here. I by no means am an authority on the use of technology. I'm simply a mere human being. It's not been too long ago that I learned how to work my own computer, believe that. But I do understand the challenge, and I do understand because I've seen the impact of the content on behavior. And although I no longer have any administrative responsibility or authority for the work of the Salvation Army, I still proudly wear this uniform because I am still a soldier, and I love to fight against that which is the enemy of the best. Last week, my wife Eva and I had the privilege of having our eldest grandchild visiting with us. Isaiah was on his spring break from his school in Kentucky, and it was a great week discovering a few things that matter to a just-turned 13-year-old teenager. And one afternoon, Isaiah and I escaped from the oversight of grandmother and had lunch together at the local McDonald's. I enjoyed hanging out with my grandson. It's just one of the many delights we're finding in our now redirected lives in retirement. And as usual, he had his fancy latest model cell phone with him, so as we sat having lunch together, it gave me the perfect opportunity to have a conversation around what he thinks about and how he uses the technology. I was absolutely astounded by what he knew and embarrassed by what I did not know. So I said to him, Isaiah, in an average day, how many times would you kind of guess that you send or receive text messages? He said, Papa, like maybe 75. And feeling the need to clarify the question, for surely I thought he misunderstood me, I said, no, I don't mean in a week, son. How many do you average, would you say, in a day? And he looked at me like his grandpa was from outer space and said, Papa, like I said, around 75. And that began a conversation about what he receives and sends, that it would amount to what I think is such an amazing number of text messages. And I learned that most of those messages are very brief, even one-liners. And I asked him if he was more comfortable texting than talking to his friends. And he said, well, Papa, like on the phone, you have to think quickly about what you're going to say, but like when I text, I don't have to express it, it's faster, better. And I said, oh really? That conversation also gave me the opportunity to underscore the message he hears from his dad and mom about being careful about what he sends and sees. And I was relieved to learn that his parents have limited his access for his protection. But ladies and gentlemen, to a novice, this issue is far more personal to me now. And I must insist, that through any means necessary, there must be controls on the trips my grandson takes into cyberspace, or watches on television, or reads in a magazine. For there is a linked implication on what he will become as an adult. What he sees has the power to inform what he believes. Isaiah is one of every 7 teens in America who have a profile on the social network. Technology is is not only shaping but controlling the future into which the children of our nation will enter. And so we gather to engage about what we can do, because there are uncountable numbers of parents and grandparents, just like me and my wife, and caregivers who often know far less about the intricacies of the age of technology than those whom they love. And this summit holds the power to stir the conscience of America. We are a nation in a malaise. And we ought to consider ourselves as having been called to rouse America from its moral sleep. Children and men and women and families are being devalued and demeaned as cyberspace becomes another major conveyor of degrading content. And for every American spoiled by the evil, as a collective nation of peoples, believe me, we will be the weaker. This gathering is more than just learning and networking as suggested about the problem and then leave to attend yet another conference. We have gathered to engage, to commit, to collectively confront the issue. We must, ladies and gentlemen, do something more effectively that will begin a transformation in this country. It is time for someone to show up, to challenge and bring correction, and I say, why not us? We have the resources and the power to do something extraordinarily good, and we will be held accountable for our action or lack of it by generations who come behind us. This time together means something for the future. As active Salvation Army officers, my wife and I lived and served overseas for nearly 8 years. We returned to the nation we love dearly on May 1, 2006, absolutely thrilled to undertake new leadership responsibilities for the Salvation Army. And I tell you, it was good to finally be home again. But we stepped off the plane that morning at Washington Dulles Airport, and within hours, literally within hours, what we thought might be occurring was proven to in fact be taking place. The indicators were literally in our face. We had come home to a different America. We returned to an America where moral integrity is being compromised and traditional values are being altered. The secularizing and sexualizing of our culture is increasing at an alarming rate of change, so much so that emerging generations, I fear, will be uncertain as to what is really good or really evil. And yes, there will be a huge social cost to pay, far beyond that which can be calculated in economic terms. That spring morning of our return to a changing America was the beginning of the deepening of our understanding that technology has been kidnapped to serve as the bridge for the accessing of the vile, which in turn is feeding on the basest of man's instinct, resulting in the holding hostage of body, mind, and spirit of men and youth and families. I tell you, the heart of America is in the grip of evil. And while I thought I was keeping an eye on America from abroad, within hours after stepping off that plane, I knew I had lost touch. It just felt different. I felt I was in that scene from The Wizard of Oz. You know the one. After being magically transported along the yellow brick road to a strange new land, Dorothy turns to Toto and says in a sort of cautious reflection, "I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. America is hemorrhaging. Once strongly held views and beliefs about the sacredness of humanity is now seeping from the veins of our culture. The sexualizing of America is in our face every hour of every day. Cyberbullying is increasing. 1 in 7 teens are receivers of unwelcomed sex messages. 9 in 10 young people, ages 8 to 16, are exposed to internet pornography. 83% of our male kids and 57% of female children have viewed, listen to this, group sex online. 69% of boys and over half of the population of our little girls have been exposed to same-sex relations via the internet. Our kids are literally under attack. Media reports it because it's sensational. But public discourse is missing, and the silence, friends, is deafening. You might expect me to say this, dressed in this uniform, but clearly we are in a war. A battle for the minds and hearts of our youth is underway. We're not in Dorothy's Kansas anymore. And lest we err in our assumptions, people of faith are not immune from this destructive force either. There are those who are in private bondage, toying with tragedy. In a study, half of the participating men describing themselves as Christian admitted to struggling with internet pornography. The impact is far less, but there are women of faith caught in the grip of porn as well. The affected sit in the seats of our churches and synagogues and mosques and temples. They stand to teach congregants from the pulpits and lecterns of houses of worship across this great land. The experts who sit among us, and thank God for you, you will help us to understand that there is a direct correlation between the unhealthy engagements in the viral world and what we shall look like as a nation in the future. And there are direct implications on marriage and family. For example, 80% of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers recently reported a rise in divorce cases that involve, guess what, social networking. And lest we miss it, anywhere in the world, and I've seen a lot of the world, but anywhere in the world when a woman is raped, a child abused, a man walks away from family responsibility, a civic, political, or religious leader espousing family values is publicly disgraced because of immoral behavior, there is a link. When a high school in an economically depressed small town in which I know establishes a daycare program in the high school for the children of its children, there is a link. When, just as reported within the last 48 hours, bodies of women were discovered, at least 4 of them at the last count I heard were prostitutes. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a link to the impact of the human body being reduced to a mere commodity. But as a nation, we seem immune to shame. We reveal the hollowness of our national soul on billboards, in print, on television and radio, and through electronic devices of every description. I say we have no choice but to be here this morning. We must show up to speak firmly in love and act boldly with good, godly intention, gracefully, informed, deliberately. We must not have, we cannot have generations in the future asking, why did those who knew better not come forward and do something? Why did they not have an answer? And I tell you, silence in the presence of evil shames not the act, but condemns he who watches and does nothing. So I ask you, are you okay with all of this? Of course you're not. And if ever there was a time for a coalition of men and women of goodwill who believe in moral rightness and justice to show up, it is this morning. I believe, Rick and Jerry and RAP, executive committee members, you have called us together at just the right time. It is time that someone speaks out, insisting protection from the onslaught of vulgarity that continues to be embedded in subtle and blatant messages that are streaming into the minds of children and into the homes of our most precious asset, the family. We can and we must do something, and we've got to do it together. I maintain that despite the way it appears on the surface, albeit in the silence, there are people desperately uncomfortable with this dramatic shift in our cultural environment. I have moved around America a lot, and there are more who long for a public return of moral rightness than those who suggest they do not care. There are those who believe that the higher value is in the control of content without losing liberty for the sake of the greater good. Free will is a right, but so also is the issuance of the warnings that will inform the choices to be made. So what better time could there be for us to show up with a word for the protecting and the healing of our nation? Together, we can speak confidence into chaos. We can bring clarity to the confusion. Given my long experience in the mission of the Salvation Army, which I'm so grateful to God, I must say this. Let us not forget that the parents and caregivers of children who comprise America's marginalized might just be the most endangered segment of our population because they think they have no voice and no power. I've considered just two of many deep implications if we leave this summit but fail to show up in the battle. One sure implication is that if we do not show up, there will be no new and strong ideas to confront the distortions eating away at the soul of our nation. The Pew Internet and American Life Project produced a report just a few years ago suggesting that the American family life is as tight-knit as in the last generation, and perhaps even more so, the report suggested, because of the widespread use of mobile phones and the Internet. By the way, the most recent count, I'm told, reports some 600 million using Facebook. I'm not one of them. The study suggests that family life has not been weakened by the explosion of technology, as many feared would be the case. In fact, 60% of the adults surveyed said that new technologies did not adversely affect the closeness of their family. And 25% in the same poll said that cell phones and online communication serve to bring members of their families nearer to one another. We know what each other is doing during the day, said one responder. Now, that's all very interesting. I find that very curious. Because in spite of that report, in 1998, only 73% of American families were headed by a married couple, compared with 93% nearly 50 years earlier. In spite of that report, a black child born today has just a 1 in 5 chance of growing up in a home with both parents. And it has been proven that fatherless homes, especially in black households, suggest exposure to higher crime rates, lower education, and public welfare, in spite of that report. You see, in our postmodern day, absorbed with technological wizardry, ladies and gentlemen, we can miss the underside of advancing forms of communication. We can miss the devastating impact in the normalizing of a changing culture as the soul of America is shredded. We must show up with fresh ideas, alive to opportunities to halt the drift from our spiritual and moral and ethical bearings. And you already know this. Tomorrow's advances will not slow down waiting for us to show up. But it's not too late. And we refuse to defer to someone else in some other time. Another implication is that if we fail to dream and act with courage, There are those who are at risk the most who might just buy into the notion that there really is no answer. They might begin to believe that the way it is inevitable and nothing can be done. And you already know that if belief vanishes, hope is gone. I'm absolutely convinced of the rightness of the vision statement of pure hope. We are in pursuit of a dream, a world free of sexual exploitation and brokenness. That is a huge vision, embracing hope, despite the brilliant advances in technology that are being used for evil purposes, resulting in shame, collapse, destruction, human brokenness. But we take courage in coming together to work at discovering how to make this big dream come true in our time. It has been a very long time in America since we became so aware of our collective need to keep a grip on hope for the sake of our future. I was in a conversation last week with a 30-something mom, and she said to me, "I'm a bear mom. I'm a bear mom. I'll do anything to protect my kids. I'm not raising them to be teenagers. I'm nurturing them into responsible adulthood. But," she said, "you know something? It's scary because of the dangers lying out there in cyberspace." It is a terrible thing when one is held hostage by what one does not understand. So we dare not minimize the power of what we can do together. With my wife, my experience of living and leading in South Africa was an amazing gift. I came out of that experience believing more than I ever thought I could in the power of one person to influence change in a society. To illustrate, the first occasion in which my wife and I had the privilege of a private audience with Nelson Mandela was remarkable. We entered the office of that tall, lanky man, slightly bent from years of toil as a prisoner on Robben Island, working for hours under the hot African sun. But as that living icon moved from behind his desk and came forward to greet us, we knew, we were absolutely certain that we were in the presence of greatness. Mandela shook my hand and warmly welcomed me and then beckoned me to take a seat. And then he moved to my wife, and he did something that shocked me. He kissed her in front of me. And I felt like saying, "Back off, Mandela. Back off." But my wife didn't wash the right side of her face for a week. But that encounter and that conversation, including a second meeting with him a year or so later, riveted in my soul the belief that one person can make a difference in a society. Oh, it may not be of Mandela proportions, but I am absolutely convinced that you and I hold more authority and influential power than we exercise. We must not be timid to act courageously on what we believe about the matter before us. I learned something else from our South Africa experience. To live in a nation among a people that only several years earlier had been released from the bondage of apartheid, it taught me and my wife the power of the collective voice and force of good, God-honoring people. On the eve of that first democratic elections in South Africa, it was believed that the nation would be consumed in flames, literally. And seeing something of the devastating consequences of legal separation of people based on the color of their skin, I also wondered in those early months how the nation had survived. And then one day, in conversation with faith leaders at a summit which had been called to address the lingering effects of the nation's past, I had my question answered. It was because on that critical day, when for the first time in their lives, Elderly black men and black women were permitted by law to stand in line to vote with elderly white men and white women. Everyone on that morning understood that they were creating their new future together. It is the enemy of goodness and greatness that puts us in danger this very hour. With 3 wars beyond our borders that have America's involvement, there is an even greater crisis to be faced within our boundaries, to which America must give immediate attention. We need our nation's commitment to this internal war as desperately as we think we need to exercise our strength in defense of other just causes in foreign lands. So do you believe in the power we hold to dream boldly and act courageously to keep safe our children and our families from this corrupting influence? Do you believe that we can depart this summit tomorrow ready to launch a new dream for America, or will we defer on the opportunity? The poet Langston Hughes left us with a probing set of questions in poetic prose about deferring dreams when he wrote, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet?" And then Hughes suggests the answer when he wrote this line, maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't believe it, we rob the future. We will restrain the rising of renewed spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical energy. If we do not engage to act in a new way, beginning this hour, we shall likely deny untold numbers of children from achieving their full worth and value as God's best creations. Defer or deny this dream, and hope will flee, leaving a vacuum in the soul of our nation available for the occupation by the enemy of good. You'll expect me to bring it in. But William Booth, the co-founder with his wife Catherine of the Salvation Army in 1865, was a fierce opponent of any evil that sought to overtake any human life. And he left a word that captures the meaning and worth of dreaming this dream and engaging this battle together. Though he spoke it in the mid-19th century, it is relevant for the 21st. And so I leave you with William Booth's passionate word about believing and engaging. Booth said this: "While women weep as they do now, I'll fight. While children go hungry as they do now, I'll fight. While men go to prison in and out as they do now, I'll fight. While there is a drunkard left, while there is a poor lost girl upon the streets, while there remains one soul without the light of God, I'll fight. I'll fight to the very end." And ladies and gentlemen, are you ready? We converge for the battle, and we can win this thing together by the grace of God. Thank you very much.